We are talking with Rose Capitolari today from Italy, actually from America, living in Italy. And she is a founder, a business owner, advisor, leadership coach, and she's going to help us with all things soft skills today and looking at business differently. You're touching on some really important aspects of coaching, and you're really passionate about coaching. You have a lot of qualifications, and I just love that because you can give the rest of the coaches some insights and just get us on track. How did you get to this place?
I never thought this would be a career, frankly. This is probably my third or fourth career. I'm not really sure. I mean, I'm a classically trained MBA. I have an MBA in marketing and management from New York, Columbia University. And I worked for American Express for the first 5-6 years of my career. I loved it. It's a great training ground for just basic business skills, culture, really innovative in culture, which of course in those days I didn't know in the early 90s, late 80s. I didn't know how innovative they were, but that really shaped a lot of my thinking of what a good culture looks like and how you make people grow. And so when I was in American Express, I got married. I got married to an Italian man who I met at business school, and we moved to Italy, and we started our own pharmaceutical business. So I really was a COO for a pharmaceutical company where I have no pharmaceutical background, but my marketing skills, my market analysis skills really helped me. And in 2011, we sold the company. So at 47 years old, I was retired, right? So I thought that was great. I was like, oh, I'm going to dance, I'm going to paint, I'm going to have so much fun, which of course I did. And then after about a year, I started thinking, oh, what do I want to be when I grow up? What is it that I want to do? And it took me a really long time to figure this out because I didn't want to just take the job offers that came along, which luckily I had, especially because in those days, I also multilingual, had experiences in different industries. I really wanted the opportunity to really do something that was impactful and that let me be who I was, quote unquote, naturally, which at that point, I didn't really know what it was. So it took me a long time to figure it out, which of course, when I tell people today, in the day of TikTok, in the day of, X letter messages on X on Twitter, taking almost a year to figure out what you want to do was really hard. I have to work very consciously to say no to things. And what I realized is where I felt the most alive, where I felt I made a big impact, and where I felt I could deliver value in ways that other people wasn't, is in helping managers, leaders to grow past what they learned in traditional schools. And the course in business school that I took, actually, I was a teacher's assistant, a TA, was called Group and Interpersonal Dynamics. We didn't have leadership development, coaching, and stuff in those days. And I had loved that. And even after business school, while I was working at American Express, I would always teach these executive courses on negotiations, on communications, on sort of understanding yourself, the dynamics in conversations. So I said, this is what I want to do full time. So I went back to school and I went back to Case Western University where Daniel Goleman did a lot of his work and Richard Boyatzis. And I studied cognitive agility and mindfulness. And I also got a brain-based coaching degree and I set up my business. And that's what I've been doing ever since. Although I have to say, when we were entrepreneurs and I didn't have a cash flow, I used to teach at the Bocconi Business School here, seminars, always on these issues, because being a teaching assistant in the US, I kept that up and I would go back and teach summer executive courses. And so there was an exchange program with Bocconi University. So I did that here. And that was a great entryway into the European market. And this is what I've been doing now for the last 15 years.
That would be something interesting to talk about is the European market, because I also spent some time in America and I'm South African. So I feel like our cultures are quite similar in that we're big thinkers, very entrepreneurial. But in Europe, it's a different, approach to education, I guess, because education is mostly cheap or free. When it comes to leadership development, how does that actually look? Are companies open to your approach to coaching, to soft skill development?
It's changed quite a bit. You know, when I moved to Italy in 95, as I said, I was teaching at Bocconi, so I did a lot of the executive programs. I taught seminars and things. So it was a newly nascent market then, right? It was growing. There were some people starting to do it. Today, it's a completely different thing, right? Leaders know they need leadership training. Leaders know that they need to grow. From my personal point of view, there's a big leap, however, especially in some markets in Europe, of I know I need continuous learning and growth to, oh my God, I have a gap in my ability to understand people, be emotionally intelligent. So while people think that it is a good thing and they believe that people should be continually growing, they don't always know how that applies to them personally and where their blind spots are. That's changing as we have diagnostics, 360s, things like that. And I think people are just getting more open. But depending on which market you're in Europe, they're all at different stages.
The way that you've described business is like very turbulent at this point. And I love that term because it's true. But how did you come up with that? Like, okay, that is the issue that we need to like navigate around how to build leadership skills for this environment.
So most of my work is around sort of how do you thrive, or as I say, dance through turbulent times, because this is a defining characteristic of the world today, right? We used to talk about a VUCA world. I'm not sure if you've heard that term: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And we would all say, okay, so how do you manage in that world? But the truth of it is, what has happened is a continuous VUCA world where everything is changing. You can't predict where and how it's changing, how fast it's changing, has made us into what they now call a BAMI world, right? Brittle, anxious, nonlinear. And I don't remember what the I is. Unknowable, I think. Anyway, not knowable. We don't know how to understand it. We can't get our heads around it. No single person can do that. And I think what's happened is our training, our schooling, even our MBAs, the best MBA programs, they train you to solve problem X, problem Y, and maybe if you're lucky, solve several problems at the same time. But in a world where everything is constantly evolving, you won't have the answer for everything. So, and there's no single person that can have the answer for everything. So what does that mean? That means you have to be able to understand and recognize all kinds of different signals in the market. The weak signals, the strong signals, signals that you understand and signals that you don't. I had a client, a big telephony company, and they were the leaders actually in the phone market for the country that they were in, local, a fairly local company. They completely, well, actually they weren't local, but they were a big European company. They completely missed the smartphone market because the engineers didn't think that was going to be the thing. And now if you look at it, that company is doing other things now, but they're no longer in telephony. They just don't know how to, they weren't ready because they weren't able to hear these market signals. So
respond appropriately.
Yeah, I respond appropriately. And I think this is one of the big skills for leadership today is this sense-making ability. How do I know what to listen to? How do I know then how to extrapolate the important things? And what do I want to do about it? And some of these are just basic human things, like it's for good thinking, right? If you don't even know what problems you're going to have in the future, and you don't know when it's going to come to you, so you're solving something, but by the time you solve that, there's already a series of other problems, you're never going to get out of this bind. So you really need to have a diverse group of people around you, diverse sources of information, kinds of information, and you need to work on your ability to listen to diversity. People who don't think like you, markets that you're not familiar with, customs, language, ways of thinking that are not innate to you. Because your job now as a leader is to understand in all this mess, make sense of it, and decide the direction. And then, of course, you have to motivate everybody to mobilize around that, right?
Yeah. So what gets in the way of people really listening and tuning into those signals? Is it ego? Is it like, what is it that blocks the leader from seeing that, oh, I should respond in this way or not be so fixed in my mindset? Is it emotional intelligence?
I think it's a combination. So I don't like to use the word ego because I think that has a lot of connotations, but I do think a good part of the problems reside in me. It always, I always say, leader, know thyself, because, if you look at most of our leaders today, we were trained to make decisions based on a certain number of facts. We were not trained necessarily to listen. We don't even know the neuroscience of how to motivate people, how to, how to a leader's job is to mobilize people around a shared vision, right? So how do you mobilize people? It's lovely to say those words, but what actually do you put in place? And I think part of that is we don't have the training, but we don't think we have, but we think we do. Because we understand the concept, we understand, we feel we understand what to do. It's like, oh, I know how tennis is played. Or, for example, I'm a huge football fan. So we watch the Premier League, the Serie A in Italy. So I feel I understand it very well. But put me on a field, I'm not going to do so well. Right? Yeah. And I think so some of these new leadership concepts are very, very similar to that. Just because you understand what they are doesn't mean you know how to move it. So how do I get information?
Yeah. And then you also mentioned resilience. What did you mean by that?
It's interesting because when people talk about resilience, they talk about, the ability to bounce back. And again, in a turbulent world, if you just bounce back, you're actually probably going backward. So for me, resilience is when something hits you down or gets you down or throws you off balance, how do you bounce back but bounce forward? How do you come back in a way that prepares you for any future changes? So in an inherently unstable world, how do you put measures in place to help you keep your balance, to help you dance, as I say? So dancing is always movement. It's not fixed. It's not sitting still. But what are the skills that you need to be able to keep your balance and not to fall? And if you fall, get up right away. So it's this failure, bouncing back from failure recovery. Athletes talk about play recovery time. I missed the ball. I'm not focused on what I missed. I'm focused on the next ball. What did I learn from that to be able to get back the next hit?
Yeah.
And so those are very specific skills also for leaders, but they're all about how do I regulate my thoughts? How do I regulate my emotions? Not keep them down, but how do I recognize them? How do I process them? And how do I use them as fuel to help me meet my bigger goals? So it's a lot about you. Leadership used to be about the skills to mobilize people, the vision. It's still about the vision, but it's much more about mobilizing people because leaders are no longer the smartest people in the room. It used to be, you would be so smart, you got promoted and you did a great job. So you got promoted again and you got a great job. But now in any given room, the leader's not necessarily the smartest person about every single topic.
So you're saying like the leadership style is really like to serve as opposed to seeing yourself as the top, like a hierarchy type of structure, but more facilitating the growth.
Serve. I think there's a lot of connotations around the word serve. I think leadership is to help grow potential wherever you find it. Mm-hmm. And forever who's ready. I view it more as a gardener, right? So a gardener's job is to make sure that all the plants, all the flowers have what they need. Some roses might need something very different than a pine tree that might need very different than a little shrub or a cactus. And the leader's job is to make sure that the ground that they're in is fertile, that there is enough sun, there's enough water so that this garden grows. Everybody has a potential. Every plant has a potential to grow and flower in a way that meets the projection of the garden. So not willy-nilly, but in the way that they need to grow. But again, I want to come back to these are very certain set of skills. And many leaders didn't learn those skills. And a lot of those skills are very introspective. And a lot of those skills are not just how do I teach somebody to do that, but, how do I shut up and listen to what other people are doing and understand who can do what and who do I listen to and, move this person and not that person. Understand what my bias is. Do I listen to everybody the same way? Do some people get more share of voice? Do I only like people who speak in a certain way?
Yeah. And do you find, so many companies, they do leadership training, but sometimes I'm like, is it even effective? Like, do you learn anything? Because politics always gets in the way. If you have a certain group of people, fighting for a role, it's always there. It's always subtly there. And so there's this dynamic as well of the positions, especially within a multinational company, for example. So there's a lot of politics that comes into play as well. So you could go to a leadership training course, but then in reality, you're always going to bump into the politics of it.
So of course I'm biased because I'm an executive coach. I do think that in today's world, what it means to be a leader changes. We all have different skills. We live in companies that have different requirements, and we're at different stages of our development. So while I think leadership development programs and sort of this blended approach is the ideal, and by blended, I mean, I do think we do need meetings where the whole group is together and you build a team and you know each other outside of just your business roles. I think those are important. I also don't think those are necessarily lasting. I think they create peaks of motivation and inspiration. But to sustain that, I think you need to have, whether it's internal coaching or follow-up meetings, but it's something you need constant work as. As I said, I'm very biased. I think coaching, the world is moving to a more coaching environment because we're all at different places and we all work individually. We grow. Some things are much harder for me to learn than for my husband. Other things are much easier for me to learn than my husband. We're two completely different people, and we're both leaders in our businesses, in our work. So I do think you need both of them in order for this leadership to be sticky. Because leadership is not a thing. It's not the way to something. It's the way of being. And it's daily and it's constant. But the problem is we all have these biases and habits and ways of looking at things, and we don't like that disrupted. Also, because mostly leaders who've gotten to where they are, they've gotten there because they're so good at what they've done.
Isn't it the position that calls you to stand up into that leadership role? So if you are in a managerial role, for example, and you want to be in a higher position in your company, what work can you do on yourself do you know what I mean? If you don't have the opportunity to demonstrate that leadership, so how can you live out leadership in any role within a company?
Part of those skills are visibility and showing up and appearing to show the traits of a leader that an organization recognizes. And we see this, Rebecca, especially with women, right? Women have socialized. I mean, there's, 50 years of research around this. Women tend to hunker down and we do our work and we hope that somebody somewhere will recognize us and then promote us, right? And then men tend to operate in a different way. They're out there, they're talking about what I did. Hey, I worked on this great assignment that did this, and we were able to do this. Let me talk to you about that. So I think this visibility is really important. Today in this hustle economy, right? Everybody's on LinkedIn and everybody's on Twitter or whatever it is, sort of humble bragging about what I did. Oh, I'm so honored to do this. And it was such a delight to do that and whatever.
I'm thrilled.
Exactly.
So thrilled with everything in life.
There's a big fatigue factor around that. People are tired of hearing this. And yet people are really hungry for quote unquote leadership. And what does that mean? They're hungry for people who'll help them think through issues. So are you a person that listens to somebody else and helps them think through the issues, or do you just give the answers? People are hungry for a voice that says right from wrong, that thinks the bigger picture? So are you somebody who in a very tactical discussion knows how to elevate the conversation? Do you know how to bring it to a vision level and then bring it back down? So this ability to operate in a zoom out and a zoom in mode, do you have those skills? People want somebody who don't have a personal interest, that they have their interests in mind. Are you somebody who can listen to people you don't like and you don't agree with and still have their interests in mind? Again, around a common shared goal, around a common vision. Are you somebody who's able to motivate different kinds of people? An introvert, an extrovert, a highly logical person, a highly emotional person, European person, a Japanese person, an Indian person. In our world, we're becoming multicultural, multi-generational, right? 5, 6 generations in the workplace, multifunctional, multilingual, multi-religion. Are you able to really understand how you operate in that?
And so where does personal branding come in leadership? You don't want to give too much of yourself. You still want to retain that respect as a leader, but you want to be authentic as well. And you have a lot of challenges. How do you see personal branding fitting into this picture of leadership?
Well, so I view personal branding the exact same way that I would view a product branding. I mean, if I were to say Apple to you, what are the top 3 words you would use to describe Apple? What are the top 3 words when you're thinking of Apple products?
Sophisticated, nice to use, and interesting.
Yeah. So the top words, wherever you are, I've done this exercise in China. I've done it in the US. I've done it in Barcelona. When you ask people about Barcelona, everybody says similar things. They're clustered around the same things, right? And user-friendly, easy to use, high design, expensive, always new and innovative. The same word clusters comes out. That's not by chance. I mean, I've worked with people at Apple and I've heard the stories about they had a great product ready to go, but it wasn't super user-friendly, or the design wasn't sleek and linear. They will not put it out in the market. They will wait until they find a better thing because they have their ideas of what it is that they want to do. You could say the same of, I don't know, Mercedes-Benz, another big European company, right? Everybody says, oh, what do they call it? It's German engineering, right? Solid, reliable, high end. So they don't put anything out that is not super reliable, that is not engineered to the nth, right? Because that is their brand. It's the same with human beings. What are the top 3 words you would like to be described as? Now, it's really interesting because even with very senior leaders, you often hear words like professional, honest. And I'm like, well, if you're a leader, that's like taken for granted. So, for example, there was a time in my life when my 3 words were caring, truth to power. Truth to power is always there. So I always tell people the truth, whether you like it, whether you don't like it. Then I tried to say it in a caring way, for example. So let's say caring, truth to power. And the third was, I was very focused at that point. I had just got my neuroscience degree, right? So I was very focused on the neuroscience. So somebody did something and I was really angry. My feelings, my emotions felt like saying, screw you. Do you know what? This is what, no, absolutely not. Blah, 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 blah. And I would have that reaction because we know what our emotions want us to do. And sometimes when you feel hurt by it, those emotions are actually quite strong, right? So then you stop and you say, but wait a minute, I understand what my emotions want me to do. What do my values want me to do? Well, how do I want to be caring? So if I react like that, am I caring? I don't know. If I react like that and I truth to power, yes, it's definitely truth. And I'm saying, is it using the best neuroscience? No. Okay, so how do I say what I'm saying in a way that's caring and using science? So it changes the way that I am able to deliver. And the interesting thing is, in all the feedback forms over years, I've been tracking feedback now for 35, 40 years. It's always the same thing. She's always caring. She's always aggiornata, they say in Italian, up to date on the statistic. And she's very direct and upfront and honest. So it's a deliberate thing. And leaders need to understand, what is their brand? What is it that I want to do? Because in times of problems, you have to stop and anchor.
And do you mean personal branding in the sense of like on social media, or just within how you carry yourself?
Well, I mean it in terms of behavior. I mean it also in terms of social media. I'm not very much on social media. It's more of social media for me is much more personal, except for LinkedIn, which when I remember, I put stuff out there. But I want them to reflect who I am. And you have to be deliberate. Does it meet all three? And some people want to be fun, innovative, and relaxed. Because we know what our gut reactions want us to do. Right? The neuroscience tell us in threat situations, when we feel threatened, when we feel, and in a turbulent world, we're always like that. Uncertainty is high, volatility is high. Somebody looks at you funny, you're like, oh my God, what do they mean? Did I say something wrong? And it's in a meeting and it's like, did I say something wrong? Do I need to reword that? Okay, wait. I understand that I feel this way. How do I now address this in a caring way, in a truthful way, in a science way? So it might be, okay, so I'm seeing that some people are maybe not comfortable with what I'm doing or what I just said. Let's talk about what objections could be to this previous statement.
When you're working with like a coachee, how do you structure the session? Because the coaching market is very open. That can bring in a lot of coaching styles that don't maybe help the coachee. So how do you approach it when you're looking at like a leader and you say, okay, well, how are we going to start tapping into understanding how the brain works with neuroscience and uncertainty and ambiguity, and how do we get clarity when we ourselves don't even have clarity? How do you sit down and work with them? Or do you work in more group settings, or how does it actually work?
I do both. I do team coaching. I do individual coaching. I do workshops as well. I always start with diagnostics. And a lot of time people have diagnostics, whether it's 360s, whether it's qualitative feedback, there's usually diagnostics. If there's not, either I work with the coachee to get some or to run a 360 or some sort of diagnostic. And then I also work with, what is it that you want to do? Where do you want to go? And so we come to a set of goals. So each coaching engagement is focused around a set of goals. Some of them are very broader goals. And then within that, we work. I mean, my job is not to solve it for a coachee. My job is to be a thought partner, and especially at the senior levels, because these are very accomplished people. So it's a huge act of humility to say, oh my God, I still have a lot to grow. But focus on where they need to grow and how do they need to grow. So we work on objectives. And then, of course, I've been doing this for many years, and I've been teaching it certainly since the 80s and 90s, late 80s, early 90s. So I have a whole bunch of tools that we use to help get that. And then we measure. And what I find is that people evolve. And as our relationship also deepens and broadens, the focus of the coaching, it changes as well. Because in the end, whether you're leader of a big company, leader of your own business or politics, not-for-profit, whatever, you really want to do work that's meaningful for you. And a lot of us are just really in the end trying to figure out where's the meaning in my work? What's the purpose in my work? How do I impact? Who do I want to impact? What are the problems I want to solve? So it really comes down to this very human level.
You are a top coach. I mean, you've sold an 8-figure business, which is usually one of the stamps of like, this is a coach you should listen to. Some coaching companies only really take on coaches that have accomplished what you have or have worked in a multinational for many years. But you say that actually doesn't distinguish you as a great coach.
I think my MBA, my degree, doesn't distinguish me as a great coach, because I believe that if you need a business coach, then you need somebody who's very good at solving business problems. Absolutely. That is quicker, faster, and especially now knows the new technologies and ways to accelerate your decision-making process in business decisions. However, I find my biggest value to the leaders that I work with does not dwell in that. What my business skills helps me with is my mindset. It helps me with vocabulary. It helps me to be able to go, toe to toe with them and challenge their thinking on certain things. But really what makes a difference in their lives, or from what I've heard in feedback and what I see, is that what they're looking for is that help and that understanding and the progression towards understanding myself better, so that I get much more clarity on where I can really glow and where I still need to grow. And how does that work? That glow and grow. Wow, that sounds like a marketing slogan.
That's your new.
But I think that's what people like, because at a certain level, it's really hard to get honest input, concrete input, and brainstorming in a very sort of psychologically safe environment, but that are useful, that are actionable. I think one of the problems with coaching, and I think, I'm biased towards this big hustle economy where anybody can sort of become a coach overnight and become a consultant overnight and become an expert overnight. I think we lack in depth sometimes. And mind you, I know people who are coaches who haven't done, long, big coaching degrees, who are certified, but haven't done these huge 2-year programs or whatever. So I'm not saying you need that qualification to be a good coach, but I do think you need the ability to really grasp issues. Some of them are business, some of them are not. So if you only have the business focus, then you would probably be a great business consultant. And there's a huge need and market for that. But coaching is something different. And certainly, in-depth coaching, coaching with impact, sustainable change. Some coaches out there, and I think, oh my goodness, my client would eat this person for lunch. So that's where the business degree is help.
But do you feel like you can work with anyone as a coach? Because it takes a lot of you emotionally. So do you, and it's not the same as like psychology or another discipline where, there are certain charts. Yes, you have some charts, but a lot of it happens in real time, like with the personality and the energy of the person. So do you find like you're picky with who you work with, or do you just work with anyone?
So that has evolved with time as well. So when I first started, I really was interested to get a wide range of clients and solve a wide range of problems. Now I'm much more vigilant as a gatekeeper. I do say actually probably now as many no's as I do yeses to clients. I think there's a lot of great coaches out there who frankly don't cost the same as I do and who could still deliver value for some of the problems. So I'm very focused on what problems do I want to solve and what kind of impact or potential will this person have on making the kinds of changes that I want to see in the world. So my mission really right now is I want to help ensure, do my best to create an environment where different voices and different perspectives are brought in to any room where decisions are being made, whether it's in the corporate world, whether it's in the not-for-profit world, whether it's in the education world. So I choose my clients very much on, is there alignment there?
They also have to be coachable.
Yeah, but usually when they come to me, they're pretty coachable. Okay. They're actively looking for it. And then frankly, even when you try, there are some assignments that after a few sessions, you say, yeah, I'm not sure if this is the right approach because I have a perspective. And not everybody likes the openness. Not everybody likes the truth to power. Not everybody likes different approaches. And I think that's fine. I mean, I've had different personal trainers in my life. I've had different yoga teachers. I've had different painting teachers, And I think that's fair.
But even in like the traditional education system, the value is really being recognized within the coaching ability of the lecturer or the teacher, because we have access to basically any kind of information you need online. And even now, ChatGPT is also acting a bit like a coach. So do you think that's replacing coaching, or how is it working? Does it devalue leadership coaching, or does it work with leadership coaching? I mean, the traditional education system's changing completely. Like people are not finishing master's degrees or MBAs and doing I did that, did a short course, did like 2 years of economics, and then was like, well, actually pivot. The startup thing seems to be more where I'm heading. And then I did like a 2-month startup course, a second one. And then, maybe I'll come back and do a master in some business thing like after some time. But I just wanted to generate like another set of skills, which I felt were more appropriate. So it's not anymore about like, oh, you have the Harvard stamp. But then the aspect of coaching within even that education system, where that is seen as like more valuable than just teaching information. So there's a difference in teaching and coaching.
Well, I love ChatGPT. My ChatGPT even has a name, and I find it's an invaluable resource. And like all resources, the quality, it's garbage in, garbage out, right? The quality of the information you get out is very closely aligned to the kinds of prompts you give, the questions you give, and the conversations you enter into. I do think it could give very good tactical advice so it depends really on your problem. If it's how do I get more visibility, or, how to manage conflicts, there's probably some good pointers. I personally, I'm not worried about AI taking over coaching or any of my roles. I'm not a technology person really at all to make a statement on involving technology. But to date, I have really found really no comparison, because I find that human contact, like we still are able to read so much into micro expressions, into posture, into body language, into reactions of people to really help us co-create something. And I do think when you put two ideas that bang together, a third one comes. ChatGPT is not yet there. I have not seen it. Things are changing. And if you think of these, these big language learning models, or whatever they're called, their job is really just to figure out the next predictable word based on probabilities. They're not looking for big, innovative ways of thinking. They're not looking for a big or very closely personal idea. So I think that's where things change. And I think leadership is really much, much more about connection and connecting with as many different sources, people, fonts, ideas, to then generate something new. And so far, ChatGPT has not been able to connect in the same way.
I think the value of coaching is also having that thinking partnership, like joining a think tank. But yeah, I think they will work together and not against each other. So lastly, Rose, if there was one message that you could put on a billboard about leadership coaching, or a takeaway that people could apply in their own lives, what would that message be?
One of my favorite poets is Rumi. He's an ancient Persian poet. And he says, when I was young, I was intelligent. And I wanted to, rule the world. Now I am older and I'm wise. I want to rule myself. And I've completely misquoted that. But the idea is, it always starts with yourself. And I think if we can get to a point where we really understand that change the world. When I was young, I was clever and I wanted to change the world. Now I am wise and I only want to change myself, because I believe that's the root of all impact. The more I can work on accepting, seeing, understanding, relating with, connecting the world around me, working on myself, the more powerful I will be. But it's a very, very, very hard thing, especially for leaders, because it's hard to say, I've come so far and look at what I've achieved, and I still have a lot to go. It's hard to say everything I've done, everything I know, everything I think could be turned on its head and questioned again. And frankly, I'm 61 years old. It's very, very hard. It's much harder to learn things now than it was when I was 30. So those are very difficult things to accept, and they require a lot of humility. And yet I believe that's where growth comes from. I do a lot of work spreading this message, keynoting, speaking at conferences on Zoom, but also in person, and to really have an impact in shaking up that part of our structured thinking.
Well, thank you so much for coming on this podcast today. It's, I'm sure, provided a lot of value and just thinking about emotional intelligence differently. And it all starts with you is the takeaway. So spend some time on self-development.
I always love talking about these topics.